The sniper adjusts his scope at 0600 hours in a scenario that will never happen. The plan exists only on paper in a filing cabinet at Special Operations Executive Headquarters in London, but the details are precise. A two-man team. Positioned in woods overlooking the Berghof, Adolf Hitler's mountain retreat in Bavaria. Range to target, approximately 200 meters. The shot would come during Hitler's morning walk to the tea house, a routine he follows with Germanic predictability, weather permitting. He walks the path alone or with minimal escort around 0800 hours. One bullet. High-powered rifle. Target stationary or moving slowly. The probability of success, high. The date for execution, never authorized. By summer 1944, British intelligence has developed a comprehensive plan to assassinate the German Führer, complete with infiltration routes, escape procedures, and detailed analysis of Hitler's routines at the Berghof. The plan is feasible. The resources are available. The authorization never comes. Operation Foxley remains in the filing cabinet while Hitler survives to April 1945, dying by his own hand in a Berlin bunker as Soviet forces close in, leaving historians to debate whether assassinating him in 1944 would have shortened the war or extended it, saved lives or cost more, and why the British government, having planned the assassination in detail, chose to let Hitler live. The idea of assassinating Hitler was not new in 1944. Multiple plots against Hitler's life had been attempted by Germans themselves. Military officers, recognizing that Germany was heading toward catastrophic defeat, had organized several conspiracies. The most significant, the July 20th plot of 1944, involved Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg detonating a bomb at Hitler's East Prussian headquarters. The bomb exploded. Hitler survived, protected by a heavy oak table that deflected the blast. Stauffenberg and hundreds of conspirators were subsequently executed. British intelligence had monitored these internal plots with interest, but without direct participation. The preference was for Germans to remove Hitler themselves. If a German assassination succeeded, it would legitimize whatever government replaced him and potentially lead to negotiated peace. If British agents killed Hitler, it would create a martyr and unified German resistance. But by 1944, the strategic calculus had changed. The Allied invasion of Normandy in June had established a Western front. Soviet forces were driving into Poland from the east. Germany was losing, but still fighting with fanatical determination. The question was not whether Germany would be defeated, but how long defeat would take and how many lives it would cost. If assassinating Hitler could accelerate collapse and save Allied lives, the moral equation justified the act. Special Operations Executive, Britain's sabotage and subversion organization, had the capability to execute such a mission. SOE had been conducting operations behind enemy lines since 1940. Their operatives had sabotaged factories, assassinated Gestapo officials, armed resistance movements, and gathered intelligence across occupied Europe. Assassinating a head of state was within their technical capability. The question was whether it served strategic interests. Planning for Operation Foxley began in June 1944. The assignment went to Section X, SOE's Research and Planning Division. The officer in charge was Major Hugh Quennell, who assembled a team to study Hitler's routines, security arrangements, and vulnerabilities. The team had access to multiple intelligence sources, ultra-intercepts, reports from German deserters, information from resistance networks, and analyses from psychologists and historians who had studied Hitler's behavior patterns. The research revealed surprising vulnerabilities. Hitler, despite being the most protected man in Europe, followed predictable routines at his Berghof retreat. The Berghof, located near Berchtesgaden in the Bavarian Alps, served as Hitler's primary residence when he was not at military headquarters. The compound included Hitler's residence, guest houses, SS barracks, and support facilities. Security was extensive but not impenetrable. Hitler's daily routine at the Berghof included a morning walk to the tea house, a small structure approximately 500 meters from the main house. The walk followed a defined path through woods. Depending on weather and Hitler's mood, the walk occurred between 0700 and 0900 hours. Sometimes Hitler walked alone. Sometimes he was accompanied by his mistress Eva Braun, his secretary, or Martin Bormann. SS guards patrolled the grounds but did not maintain constant visual contact during the walk. This routine represented the primary vulnerability. A sniper positioned in the woods along the walk route would have a clear shot at predictable times. The woods were not continuously patrolled. The terrain allowed infiltration by skilled operatives. Escape routes existed through the mountains into Austria or Switzerland. The tactical problem was solvable. The Foxley plan developed 3 variants. Plan A, sniper assassination during the morning walk. Plan B, bomb placed in Hitler's personal train during a scheduled trip. Plan C, poison introduced into the water supply at Berghof. Each plan had advantages and disadvantages. Plan A, the sniper option, offered the highest probability of success and the clearest confirmation of kill. A skilled marksman at 200 meters would have better than 90% hit probability against a stationary or slow-moving target. The rifle would be a standard Lee Enfield No. 4 Mark I, chambered in .303 British. Effective range, 600 meters. At 200 meters, accuracy was sufficient to place rounds within a 6-inch circle. A torso hit would be fatal or incapacitating. A headshot would be instantly fatal. The team would consist of 2 men. The primary shooter would be an experienced sniper, preferably with combat experience. The second man would provide security, cover the escape route, and take the shot if the primary was compromised. Both would be German speakers, capable of passing as locals if questioned. They would infiltrate across the Austrian border, hike through the mountains to positions near Berghof, establish a hide site, wait for opportunity, take the shot, and exfiltrate through Switzerland. Plan B involved placing a bomb on Hitler's private train. Intelligence indicated Hitler traveled by train between Berlin and Berchtesgaden regularly. The train, designated Führersonderzug Amerika, consisted of 15 carriages, including Hitler's personal car, sleeping quarters, conference rooms, and anti-aircraft defenses. Security was intense. The train was inspected before every journey. Guards rode in forward and rear carriages. But the train made regular stops for servicing and coal. During these stops, access might be possible for someone in railway worker disguise. The bomb would be a time-delayed device, set to detonate when the train was in a remote section of track. This would maximize casualties and minimize chance of rescue. The bomber would need access to the undercarriage of Hitler's car, technical knowledge of explosive placement, and nerves sufficient to work under minimal time pressure while guards patrolled nearby. The escape plan was less developed. The bomber might not survive to escape. Plan C, the poison option, was the most complex and least certain. Introducing poison into the Berghof water supply required access to the facility, knowledge of the plumbing system, and a poison that would be undetectable until consumed. The quantity needed to ensure lethal dose for Hitler while contaminating supply for an entire compound was large. The poison would need to be tasteless, odorless, and fast-acting, and there was no guarantee Hitler would consume enough to die before the contamination was discovered. SOE evaluated all 3 plans in detail. Plan A emerged as preferred. It had the highest probability of success, offered clear confirmation, and had a viable escape route for the operatives. Plan B was high risk for the operatives with uncertain results. Plan C was too complex with too many uncontrollable variables. But as planning progressed, doubts emerged about whether assassination served British strategic interests. The arguments against killing Hitler came from multiple quarters and proved surprisingly persuasive. The military intelligence analysis pointed out that Hitler had become a strategic liability for Germany. His insistence on no retreat orders had led to catastrophic German defeats at Stalingrad, Tunisia, and in the Falaise pocket after Normandy. His interference in military operations was consistently counterproductive. German generals, constrained by Hitler's orders, made poor decisions because Hitler's strategic judgment was worse than theirs. Removing Hitler might result in German military leadership conducting the war more competently, potentially extending resistance and increasing Allied casualties. The psychological warfare analysts argued that Hitler was more valuable alive as a symbol of Nazi failure. His increasingly erratic behavior, visible in propaganda films and radio broadcasts, demonstrated the bankruptcy of Nazi ideology. His survival in the July 20th bomb plot had been presented as divine providence, but his inability to prevent German defeats undermined that narrative. A living Hitler, presiding over Germany's collapse, was better propaganda than a dead Hitler who could be mythologized as a martyr. The political analysts worried about post-war consequences. If Hitler died by assassination, Nazi loyalists could claim Germany had not truly been defeated, but had been betrayed. The stab-in-the-back myth, which had plagued Germany after World War I, could re-emerge. Better that Hitler survived to sign surrender documents, to be captured and tried, or to die ingloriously in a bunker, making clear that Germany had been comprehensively defeated. The intelligence services raised concerns about retaliation. If Britain assassinated Hitler, what prevented Germany from assassinating Churchill, Roosevelt, or Stalin? The precedent of targeting heads of state could backfire. While the Allies had stronger security, the risk existed. And if Germany attempted retaliation, even unsuccessful attempts would have propaganda value for the enemy. There was also the succession problem. If Hitler died, who would replace him? Hermann Göring was the designated successor, but was widely viewed as incompetent and unpopular. Heinrich Himmler might seize power, bringing SS efficiency to the war effort. Or the Wehrmacht might take control, potentially prosecuting the war more effectively than the Nazi Party had. The unknown successor was potentially more dangerous than the known Hitler. Some analysts argued from moral grounds. Britain was fighting a war to defend civilized values. Assassination of the heads of state, even enemy heads of state, violated international law and norms. Britain had criticized German assassination of political figures in occupied countries. Assassinating Hitler would be hypocrisy. Better to maintain moral high ground even if it cost military advantage. These arguments accumulated through summer and fall 1944. The Foxley plan remained viable. The operatives could have been selected and trained. The mission could have been authorized. But the authorization never came. The decision-makers, weighing military advantage against strategic risk, chose to let Hitler live. The July 20th plot and its aftermath influenced the decision. After Stauffenberg's bomb failed to kill Hitler, the purge of German officer corps was extensive. Thousands were arrested. Hundreds were executed. The Wehrmacht, already demoralized, became even less effective as Hitler trusted no one and micromanaged operations more intensely. From the Allied perspective, the failed assassination had weakened Germany more than a successful one might have. By late 1944, the war's trajectory was clear. Soviet forces were approaching Germany from the east. Allied forces had liberated France and were approaching German borders from the west. Strategic bombing was destroying German industrial capacity. The U-boat threat was contained. German oil supplies were exhausted. Victory was inevitable regardless of whether Hitler lived or died. The question was timing, and killing Hitler might not accelerate the timeline if his successor proved more competent. The operational risks also influenced the decision, even with detailed planning. The mission had significant failure probability. The infiltration could be detected. The hide site could be discovered. Hitler might change his routine. Weather might prevent the shot. The escape might fail. If operatives were captured, interrogation under torture might reveal SOE capabilities and compromise other operations. The risk-reward calculation became less favorable as the war turned decisively in Allied favor. There was also the practical consideration that SOE had limited resources. Every operation required personnel, equipment, and planning time. Missions that directly supported Allied advances, such as sabotaging railways, arming resistance, and gathering intelligence, had clear value. Assassinating Hitler, with uncertain strategic benefit and considerable risk, might divert resources from operations with proven effectiveness. The files remained in the cabinet. The operatives were never selected. The rifles were never prepared. Hitler continued his morning walks to the tea house at the Berghof, unaware that British intelligence had mapped every step, calculated every angle, and chosen not to pull the trigger. Hitler's final months demonstrated the wisdom or folly of that decision. Depending on perspective, he moved to Berlin in January 1945 as Soviet forces drove into Germany. He directed increasingly fantastical counteroffensives with armies that no longer existed. He ordered units to hold positions they could not possibly defend. He dismissed generals who counseled reality. His decisions in the final months were catastrophically bad for Germany, but accelerated Allied victory. In the Führer bunker beneath Berlin, Hitler's mental state deteriorated. He raged at betrayals, blamed subordinates for failures his orders had caused, and maintained belief in miraculous reversal until Soviet shells were landing on the Reich Chancellery. On April 30th, 1945, with Soviet troops blocks away, he shot himself. Eva Braun, whom he had married the day before, took cyanide. Their bodies were burned in a shell crater. The Third Reich survived its founder by 1 week. Post-war analysis of Operation Foxley revealed the full extent of planning. The files, declassified in 1998, showed that British intelligence had developed not just assassination plans, but psychological profiles of Hitler, analyses of Nazi succession scenarios, and assessments of how different assassination methods would affect German morale and Allied propaganda opportunities. The research was comprehensive, the planning was professional, and the decision to abort was calculated. The debate about whether Hitler should have been assassinated continues. Those who argue for assassination point to the lives that might have been saved if the war had ended in summer or fall 1944. The final months of war were among the bloodiest. Hundreds of thousands died in the Battle of the Bulge, the bombing of German cities, the Soviet advance through Poland and Germany, and the final battles for Berlin. If Hitler's death could have accelerated surrender, the lives saved would number in hundreds of thousands. Those who argue against assassination point to the counterfactuals. A more competent German leadership might have organized more effective resistance. The German officer corps, freed from Hitler's interference, might have conducted fighting withdrawal that extended the war into 1946. The Nazi propaganda machine might have used Hitler's martyrdom to energize resistance. The post-war occupation might have been complicated by German refusal to accept defeat, claiming their leader was murdered rather than defeated. The moral arguments remain unresolved. Assassination violates international law and norms against targeting heads of state. But those norms assume states operate within civilized bounds. Hitler's regime had murdered millions. The Holocaust was ongoing. Every day Hitler lived, more people died in concentration camps. Did moral prohibition against assassination apply to a leader conducting genocide? Or did moral obligation to stop genocide override procedural concerns about assassination? The practical arguments are easier to assess. He could have executed the mission. The technical capability existed, but technical capability does not determine strategic wisdom. The decision not to proceed reflected judgment that killing Hitler served British interests less than letting him continue mismanaging Germany's defense. The operatives who might have been selected for Foxley never knew they were candidates. The mission never progressed beyond planning. No one was recruited, briefed, or trained specifically for Hitler assassination. The plan existed as possibility, evaluated and rejected, in parallel universe where different decision was made. Those operatives might have infiltrated Bavaria, taken position in woods near Berghof, waited through cold night for Hitler's morning walk, and changed history with a single bullet. In the timeline that actually occurred, Hitler survived all assassination attempts, presided over Germany's destruction, and died by his own hand. Whether this outcome was better or worse than alternatives can be debated but not proven. The counterfactuals are unknowable. What is known is that British planners, having developed detailed capability to kill Hitler, chose not to use it. The Berghof still exists, though extensively modified. The tea house where Hitler took his morning walks is ruins. The path through the woods is overgrown. Tourists visit, unaware they are walking the route that British snipers studied in photographs. The route that might have been killing ground if different decisions had been made in London offices in 1944. The Lee Enfield rifles that might have fired the shots were never modified for the mission. They remained standard-issue weapons, used in conventional combat by soldiers who never knew their rifles had been considered for history's most consequential assassination. The bullets that might have killed Hitler were never manufactured to specifications, never loaded into magazines, never chambered. Major Hugh Quennell, who led the planning team, continued his SOE work through war's end. He never publicly discussed Operation Foxley during his lifetime. The plan remained classified for over 50 years. When the files were finally released, Quennell was long dead. He left no record of his personal views on whether the mission should have been executed. He had done the professional work of planning, then accepted the decision from above to stand down. The two-man team that existed only in planning documents would have needed specific qualifications: German language fluency, cold weather survival skills, marksmanship expertise, ability to navigate mountains, psychological stability to wait days or weeks for single opportunity, and courage to execute mission, knowing capture meant torture and execution. Several SOE operatives met these qualifications. None were selected because selection never occurred. The escape route through Switzerland was mapped in detail. The operatives would have crossed into Austria, traversed mountain passes, entered Swiss territory illegally, and contacted British intelligence through prearranged channels. Switzerland, officially neutral, cooperated quietly with Allied intelligence throughout the war. The Swiss would have interned the operatives briefly for appearances, then released them to British custody. The plan was solid. It was never needed. At 0600 hours in a scenario that never happened, the sniper adjusts his scope and prepares for a shot that will never be taken. Hitler walks to the tea house in thousands of mornings, routine and vulnerable, protected more by British strategic calculation than by SS security. The bullet that could have changed history remains theoretical, existing only in files that documented what might have been and in debates that continue decades after all participants are dead. Operation Foxley stands as example of capability constrained by judgment. Britain could have killed Hitler. The resources existed. The plan was solid. The decision was made to let him live based on analysis that his death might harm Allied interests more than help them. Whether that analysis was correct cannot be proven. What can be said with certainty is that the war ended with Hitler dead by his own hand, Germany defeated unconditionally, and British operatives never taking the shot they had carefully planned. The greatest assassination that never happened. The bullet never fired. The mission never executed. The decision made not by technical inability, but by strategic choice. Operation Foxley remains footnote to history, a path not taken, a question never answered. Would killing Hitler in 1944 have saved lives or cost more? Would Germany have collapsed faster or resisted longer? Would the post-war settlement have been simpler or more complex? The counterfactuals multiply infinitely, proving nothing except that some decisions cannot be validated or refuted, only made and lived with. Consequences unknowable until the timeline that actually occurred reaches its end.